Hi, my name is Kathleen Deboer, and I'm the Deputy Head of the OECD Washington Center. I'm responsible for the dissemination of our intellectual content throughout the United States and Canada. What exactly does that mean in practice? I promote our work, so I need to be knowledgeable about a great deal of economic information, stay on top of trends, understand what researchers are working on, and how our data and policy analysis can help. To do this, I travel a great deal, make lots of presentations, attend conferences, teach people how to use our data, provide research support for clients in government, academia, and the private sector. My background is that I have an undergraduate degree in economics from Harvard University, where I also studied French, Italian, and Spanish. After graduation, I worked in publishing, sales, marketing, and product development of both books and software for most of my career. 22 years ago, I was invited to go to China by the American Library Association, an organization that I have been involved with for many years. It was part of the Citizens Ambassador program. It was a life-changing experience for me. When I came back after 3 weeks, I decided that I wanted to go back there and teach. China's period of breakneck development was just starting to take off, and I had a ringside seat for one of the most exciting development stories in history. It was fascinating to watch the transition from communism to at least some free markets and the entrepreneurism of the Chinese people. Many of my former students have become very successful in both business and government, and thanks to the internet, I've stayed in contact with them and involved with China ever since. I lived and worked there for a total of 5 years, and I've been back many times in between. When I interviewed for my job at the OECD, I had economics, computer skills, a strong publishing background, and French, plus the experience of teaching in China. My boss thought I was overqualified, but I took the job and grew it into something more interesting than the original job description. I created the OECD Student Ambassador Program, which has been a great success for 5 years and has been adopted by our centers in Japan and Mexico as well.
What is the history and membership of the OECD?
On December 14, 1960, 20 countries originally signed a convention of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Since then, 14 countries have become members of the organization. So we now have a total of 34 countries. We also have key partnerships with 5 other countries, and we work with over 100 different countries on different projects. Canada and the United States were the 2 first countries to sign the convention.
What are the goals and programs of the OECD?
Today, the OECD sums up its mission with the slogan, "Better Policies for Better Lives." I've provided links to some additional YouTube videos that will amplify this. We believe that cooperation among countries can aid in development, not only through trade and tax cooperation, but also by setting standards and learning from each other. Much of our work is peer review. For example, the PISA program of International Student Assessment, compares students' performance at 15 years old from about 87 countries in the world. And we might be able to look at the results and say, what are the South Koreans and Finns doing to get better outcomes in education, and what can Italy learn from them?
Where does the OECD concentrate its efforts for economic development?
Today we are working, we have a program called MENA, Middle East and North Africa. We also have work in Central Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe.
And what part of OECD's portfolio are involved in these countries?
So we have something called the Development Assistance Committee, the DAC, and its job is to measure the effectiveness of development assistance by country and international organization donors. We collect and publish the creditor reporting system, which gives very granular detail about official development assistance, where the money comes from and how it is spent.
What OECD programs facilitate sustainable economic development?
We have something now called Policy Coherence for Sustainable Development, PCSD. It's a policy tool to systematically integrate the economic, social, environmental, and governance dimensions of sustainable development into policymaking and ensure that they are mutually supportive. This year's edition of the report is focused on green growth strategies. Central to achieving the SDGs, realizing green growth calls for the application of policy coherence for sustainable development, and to key policy areas such as water, climate, energy, infrastructure, economic growth, and development.
What are the criteria for OECD involvement and oversight on donor programs?
The OECD is not involved in oversight, but it measures and it is an advisor. The oversight function is more a function of World Bank and other donor organizations.
What does the OECD do to guard against donor dependency?
We recommend capacity building in the recipient country so that they are not so dependent on aid going forward.
So what is it that the OECD does not do?
We do not lend money to any country or organization. We do not initiate any development projects or programs. We give advice. We create policy-making tools. For example, we would not decide to build a hospital, bridge, or school, but we would publish reports on how to do these things well. We have some very interesting work on earthquake-proofing schools that was developed in Turkey, a member country, and was then very useful to China after the big Sichuan earthquake several years ago. We have a regular publication of the best design of schools and universities, which is a very beautiful book. So we look at how aid is being spent and advise on how it might be better spent. And once again, emphasis on peer review. Our countries try to learn from each other.
What groups do you interact with?
The World Trade Organization, the UN, the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, government ministers, and the ambassadors.
And what organizations are your partners, for example?
Well, some of the above mentioned, and also we work with the World Bank, the IMF, the EU, and the IADB.
What are your funding sources?
Each member country is assessed based on the size of their GDP, and that money goes to funding what we call our Part 1 budget, which are our core programs. There are also other programs that not every member country is involved in, and those we call Part 2, and they make voluntary contributions to those. So that funds the projects outside of our main programmatic work. We've also recently been authorized to seek funding from foundations for certain projects. This is actually a governance change at the OECD and will allow us to use our capacity to do some very interesting work for foundations without having to ask our member governments for more money.
Has your budget of the OECD grown over the past decade?
No, it has remained flat. We have an agreement with the members until 2018 to keep the budget flat. After that, the members, that is our 34 member countries, will vote to decide the level of funding. Many of our member countries are not in great financial shape since the Great Recession, so I don't think we can expect much of an increase. Nevertheless, we do work that they use. We, along with the World Bank and IMF, are the de facto secretariats for the G20. President Obama made it very clear at the outset of his presidency that he wanted to continue working with the post-World War II multinational organizations as they were, not create a new architecture. I would expect a Clinton administration to do the same, but I don't know what Donald Trump would do about us.
Does the OECD have additional sources of support?
Yes, our publishing work, that is the maintenance of our website and printing and shipping of books, is funded through sales. The creation of the intellectual product is funded through member contributions based on the size of their GDP. So US, Germany, and Japan are the biggest donors, but the US share has decreased by around 5% as new countries have joined.
What are the challenges for the OECD involvement in sustainable economic development issues?
There's always more work to do than there is funding. So I think the big challenge is for us as an organization to choose which big areas we're going to work on. So far, water and green growth and anti-corruption would be examples of kind of big areas.
Do the challenges addressed by the OECD in Africa and Central Asia differ by part of the country?
Yes and no. Cultures are different, but many of the big problems are the same. The education of women is a key driver of development, but it is a problem for cultural reasons in both Africa and Central Asia, and in rural and city areas. A student from Pakistan once said to me that he thought corruption was the single biggest barrier to development in his country. I thought that statement would apply to many countries in Africa as well. Now, the Chinese have managed great development with plenty of corruption, but there have been negative consequences, and Xi Jinping is cracking down on it. One of the outcomes is that gambling revenues in Macau have decreased as the high-rolling corrupt government officials have cut back on their gaming.
What do you see for the future of the OECD's role in sustainable economic development and environment? Are you looking for new programs in Africa and Central Asia?
That is not what we do.
So do you see the expansion of existing programs?
Maybe.
What do you foresee the OECD doing in 2020 and 2025?
Economic measurement has always been our foundation. Our work will continue to emphasize internationally comparable macroeconomic analysis, such as the main economic indicators and the national accounts databases. Quality of life indicators, such as the Better Life Index. But the methodology of gathering statistics is headed for a big change with big data and new data science disciplines. So that will be an area where I think we're going to change our methodology as an organization down the line. We'll likely continue to add new members who embrace our principles of open, transparent government and market economies. We'll continue to work with our key partners such as China, India, and Brazil. Wherever there's work that benefits from an international collaborative effort, the OECD will be well positioned to provide the expertise and the forum.
What advice would you give college students about involvement in organizations to spur sustainable development in Africa?
One new trend are the additional development banks. India just released massive grants for African development in agriculture and infrastructure, and the China Development Bank aims to be on par with the World Bank by 2020. It's an interesting time in sustainable development because the financing has never been so freely available to entrepreneurs. And I just wanted to add a little bit about what the OECD looks for when we hire new graduates or people mid-career. We look for talented individuals with high academic achievements, professional credentials, and a record of demonstrated performance and results. OECD employees become international civil servants and must be members of an OECD member country, must be citizens of an OECD member country. We look for people with strong interpersonal and communication skills to work in an international, team-oriented, and collaborative environment. We work in English and French, and we look for an excellent command with proven drafting ability in at least one of these languages and a willingness to learn the other. We look for management skills if you're going to be managing people, and the ability to play a role in recruiting, motivating, and developing others. And also, many of us have to travel a great deal for our jobs, so we look for people that have experience doing that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present a little bit about myself and the OECD to your class. As I mentioned, I'm providing links to a couple of pre-made videos to give you more information about the OECD online, and I will be available for Q&A via Skype or Facebook Messenger later on.